Now, by way of explanation and apology, a company asked me to write a textbook. And you have to fill that out with chapters. And they wanted a chapter on arms control. And I thought, oh my God. I guess I have to because it's a big topic. But it's so boring. At least I thought so. I mean, what can one say that's of any use that hasn't been said or tortured to death by departments of political science or worse? So I started to think about it, and this was about a little over a year ago, and it occurred to me that there was an interesting problem that I didn't think anybody, including the people I knew in the administration, were thinking about, and that is, well, what if he gets reelected? By the way, prediction, very likely, but you may want to check that out with your other comrades working on domestic politics, why that might be so. I said, well, he wants to increase the defense spending 7% per year, and you do that over 7 or 8 years. Wow, that's a big number. That's almost double. 10 years it's doubling, if you know your compounding. And I knew some people working on the nuclear posture review, and so it occurred to me, maybe we need to think about what we're doing. So I wrote him a note, and you'll see a copy of it. It's redacted for all the right reasons as to who it was sent to. And I more or less said, we need to compete. Now, I worked in the Office of Net Assessment for Andy Marshall, who wrote the introduction to this book. You can look him up. And one of the big things he did was paid enough attention to what the Russians were saying to understand that competition was important. And then he went and actually looked at things going on at Harvard Business School and looked at something called competitive strategies. The enthusiasm for using the word compete today comes from Mr. Marshall's interest in competitive strategies 30 years ago or more. And I worked in that office. So I said, compete is now a good word, and okay, so we're competing. But apparently we're competing in the following fashion. We need to modernize our strategic nuclear forces because, well, we need to catch up, is what's said. Okay, and then you catch up, and then you're competing. But does anybody have the happy ending? What are we competing for? I mean, as our dear leader would put it, we compete to win. We want to be winners. What does winning look like? If you don't have that happy ending, you might have a little bit of friction over time trying to double the defense budget because you need a story. All political acts, evil and good, have to have a narrative. And by the way, there's no data on that. Sorry. I don't know why I'm looking at you. All of you. All of you. The power of narrative is to numbers as infinity is to zero in politics. It is the lifeblood of what matters. And it is not easy to crack open the secrets of the narrative. And that's the reason, actually, we have political science. Not so much for the numbers.
The Minerva team is loving every word of it. That's what they do.
I know. And we love you nonetheless. However, there is this other dimension, and you get hit with it as soon as you walk within the confines of the Beltway. It's a different world. Get out there. Get hit. It's very interesting. I've been temporarily there since 1981. Okay. So that narrative, I said, is needed. And I've got an idea. And the idea, and this is what I'm going to be talking to you today about, is the happy ending might be that we're competing to cap or close out competitions that we probably can't win unless we do. And The example I gave them, this was in July of last year, is I said, the INF Treaty, which I have personal intimate knowledge of. I worked for Senator Dan Quayle, and as a result of him being on armed services, I was one of 2 people who was allowed to read the negotiating record. And the big takeaway there is they're useless, and they don't tell you anything. But beyond that, there was an aide memoire, which is essentially an amendment to that treaty that was a result of the work that I did. And I'll even go further. If you read Woodward on Quayle, that work is what made him vice president, because it scared the heck out of some people, including the vice president, who was president-elect, and they went and tried to talk to him. And when they did, they discovered there was an interesting person. And that's sort of how things followed from there. I did not know that at the time, by the way. In any case, I knew something about the INF Treaty. And I think, as a critic of it, I discovered I was wrong. And I discovered that the proponents of it didn't know why they were for it either. And they were wrong. But it was a really interesting treaty to learn about after the Cold War. There is an argument, and I'm sure it's rebuttable, but how should I put it? I love this narrative. It's powerful, and it's hard to disprove. And because it's useful, I'm going to give it to you. Soviet military wanted to break up NATO. And they thought by targeting NATO with missiles designed only to target NATO, they would be able to unhinge the American-Canadian connection and break the alliance up. They failed. And when they failed, Gorbachev said, we're going to cut the deal. And when they cut the deal, the Soviet military command was diminished in their role in the Politburo. That wasn't the only reason, but that was a key reason why, not so many years later, the wall fell and the empire collapsed. Not only that, but we got out of the business of having these missiles, which made the comparative advantages of the United States conventional forces all the greater. Not a bad day of government work. I set that out as a model. We're going to examine what that might mean in 2 areas, missiles and space. I'd like to have enough time to talk to you about physical controls, but I'm not gonna. And if any of you want to hang around, I have time to do that, but I won't bore you with that now. We're going to talk about the stuff most people think about when they say the illicit phrase of the era right now, arms control. I am learning not to use it because it is loaded, and we'll see why in a moment. Okay, questions. What might the attributes of a Trump...
Do you mind if we ask questions in the middle? Or do you prefer to
I don't mind. I think it's helpful. By the way, do we turn into pumpkins at a certain time? Because
well,
if you do, that'll be very annoying, and I'll never get done.
Yeah, so I think what we should do, so we do need to finish by 1:30 at the absolute latest.
Okay.
So I think what we should do is let's have them hold their questions here, because I've
Okay.
seen some of your slides, so I know there's a lot coming.
Yes.
Yeah, so let's hold a little bit here, and then we'll just go through.
It's his fault.
Yeah.
Okay, what might the attributes of a Trumpian arms control agenda be? What emerging threats might it focus on? How could new forms of diplomacy strengthen America's strategic responses to these emerging threats? That's what we're going to cover.